Welcome to the Hirshberg Entrepreneurship Institute's webinar series, Yes, We Can, Perspectives and Strategies for Success in 2021. We will begin the webinar in about 5 minutes. Thank you for joining us. We will begin the webinar in about 3 minutes. Thank you for joining us at the Hirshberg Institute's webinar series, Yes, We Can, Perspectives and Strategies for Success in 2021. Today's presentation is Be Smart with Your Cash in a Post-COVID Environment with Elliot, Begoun and Ashley Hartley. Just a couple of housekeeping things before we get started. We will be using the Q&A primarily and functions at the bottom of your screen. So you will look on the bottom, and if you click on that, you'll get this window popping up. And you can just type in your question on the bottom and then hit send, and we will see your question as it comes up. And before we get started, we'd like to ask you a few questions so that our panelists know a little bit about you. First of all, we'd like to find out, do you plan to raise capital in the next 12 months? Just let us know what your thoughts are on that. And then also let us know what stage your company is in. Oh, we're getting a lot of good responses there. We have quite a few people on. We're still waiting for a few more votes. If you haven't thought about it yet, or maybe if something unforeseen might come up, you never know. Okay. It looks like definitely a lot of you are going to be raising some capital in the next year. And some of you are in your seed stage and some of you are some other stage. So great, it's good to know. And with that, I'd like to introduce you to Gary Hirshberg. What?
There we go. Hear me now? Am I good?
Yep.
Okay, good. Thank you, Carlene. And very interesting poll results. We're all kind of all over the map here, but obviously it's more than half are either probably or definitely raising capital. That's going to be a nice fit with our theme today. So welcome back, everybody, or if you haven't been with us before, welcome. This is our second of our 2021 webinars. We are here in part because of the support of New Hope Network. So I want to thank New Hope as well and encourage you to pay close attention to their site, as they have a huge number of networking and educational activities on tap for the coming weeks and months. We are really here due to your requests. We had a very robust series this spring, and many of you asked us to come back, and the topics that you will see, and we'll post up the schedule at the end of today's session. The topics that you'll see are really in response to the topics that you would like to, you've all told us that you'd like to hear more about. So if there are other topics, or there are specific speakers or issues that you would like addressed, please get them into us, because we're now scheduled out into March, but we can certainly add more as long as there's interest. As with the Entrepreneurship Institute, and we'll give you the dates of that again shortly, which will be in May. Our whole purpose here is just to help you not just survive these difficult times, but obviously grow and be successful. To that end, let's see, we'll pull the polling up. I do want to just remind you just one important piece of for you today. We have, you'd probably be wise to keep the chat open, as Carleen mentioned, because we will, there will be links, there will be resources that our speakers and presenters may want to share with you that we'll post there. You may have other links and other ideas to share with your fellow participants. But please, for those who do have questions for our panelists, please use the Q&A. And again, I think by now everybody's pretty Zoom literate here, but right across the bottom of your screen, just click on there. Our format today will be, we'll hear from Ashley and Elliot on their, they have a kind of a couple of prepared comments here on our topic. And then Madeline, Haydon, who I'll introduce in a second, and I will engage with them in some back and forth. But we will get to your questions, and we'll either get to them along the way, or we will definitely reserve the last half hour at the very least. So keep those questions coming as the session unfolds. So to introduce our presenters here, Ashley Hartman is here from Bluestein Ventures. Sorry, I do that all the time. Bluestein's a family-backed venture capital fund that invests in the future of food. They invest in early stage ventures that span the whole value chain from B2C to B2B. And they focus on 4 areas: high growth consumer brands, proprietary food tech, next gen commerce, which of course is everything, pretty broad spectrum there, and digital technology. They're very active. They take a role, and one of the main reasons we wanted Ashley here is she and they are very, very hands-on. They get more involved in more than just providing funds. They provide a lot of help with go-to-market. They're very grounded in the realities of today's marketplace. And so Ashley herself is involved in screening, due diligence, portfolio support, and of course, strategy for both their firm and also their portfolio company. So she's got a lot of experience in growth, and that'll become evident. So I won't add to the introduction, but other than to say that we're really thrilled to have you here, Ashley. So thank you. If Elliot looks like he's in the dark, I just sent Elliot a text. It looks like that scene in Apollo 13 where the power goes off and they're on power conservation. Elliot's in North Central California, where for those of you who aren't aware, there's been massive power outages today due to terrible rainstorms. And so Elliot has moved into his freezing cold office where there's at least some electricity to join us. So we thank you for your heroism and your sacrifice. And if anybody sees Elliot turning blue, I'm pretty colorblind, but just we'll call the EMTs out there, but hopefully he can hang in there. If you were with us last week, you know that Elliot is an HEI regular. He's the founder of the Intertwine Group, a practice focused on helping emerging food and beverage brands grow. He really helps position brands to raise capital, prove velocity, gain distribution, drive revenue, and win share of stomach. Elliot is a frequent speaker and presenter and coach and advisor. And you will hear Elliot and me and Ashley using the words capital efficiency probably about 400 times over the next 90 minutes or 80 minutes. But I'm also really happy to have Madeline with us. Madeline has also become an HEI regular, joining us from Seattle. Madeline, I think everyone probably knows, she's a bit of a rock star, but she's the founder and CEO of Nut Pods, which is the best-selling non-dairy creamer brand, and an Ernst & Young Entrepreneur of the Year. And you know, Madeline, like a lot of us, developed her brand based on personal need. But of course, it's now grown to this, you know, fantastic #3 brand in the exploding plant-based non-dairy creamer category. And she's really become a mentor, advisor, and inspiration for not just bootstrapping and being thrifty and careful about use of capital, but also obviously about exploiting opportunities for profitable e-com. And she's got the scars to prove it. As we know, it's a very volatile space these days. It's easy to fall into lots of cash consuming traps. So Madeline is a very particularly appropriate panelist with me for today, as you will all hear. So Madeline, thank you. Elliot, thank you for joining as well. And with that, we're going to turn it over to you to get us started, Ashley.
Thanks, Gary. We're all excited to be here. Can't wait to hear what everyone is concerned about in the audience. But Ellie and I have a short little presentation of top 10 tips. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Can everyone see that? Yes.
Oh, good. Yep.
Okay. Let me just try to move to slideshow view. Perfect. And I'm going to hand it off to Elliot. Did that work or no?
It just dropped out of slideshow, but not a problem.
Okay. Elliot, you can go ahead.
We'll give everyone a good to be here. And again, yes, if you see me shaking or hear my teeth chattering, I apologize in advance. I am really wishing that, Madeline, you could send me that Snuggie, because I am a cold weather wimp. So, but I'm not like Gary, who is avidly kite skiing out on frozen lakes. I'm happier sitting on a beach. So we're going to go through our kind of top 10 tips for being smart with your cash and driving capital efficiency. And if anyone wants to turn it into a drinking game, anytime any of us say capital efficiency, we'll see who can make it to the end of the webinar and still complete full sentences. But Ashley, let's break into the list, and I'll hit with number 1. So the number 1 tip to managing your cash and being smart with your cash is understanding that transactional profitability and cash are not the same thing. That there is a real difference between looking at a transaction purely on margin versus looking at a transaction in terms of the cash conversion cycle. And so we get caught up. We talk a lot about margin in this business, and don't get me wrong, that is vitally important, but it is not the only variable in which you need to assess an opportunity. The other, of course, is how long it's going to take to convert that into cash. So Ashley, you want to continue? Thank you. So I wanted to put this in visual terms, right? So it's easy to say, but difficult sometimes to conceptualize. And Andy Whitman does a version of this as well. So I'm stealing a bit of his intellectual property as I do this. But let's take a look at a typical P&L. And so if you look at this P&L, emerging brand, hockey stick growth trajectory, you see good revenue, growth from 2020 through 2024. You see that the business is moving towards EBITDA profitability or break even by its third year. So, going to be EBITDA positive in year 4 or 5. On paper, this looks like an interesting brand. This looks like a brand that is moving in the direction and in the way that you would hope a brand would move. And you could be excited about this until you layer in what this means to cash. So if you go to the next slide. So layering cash. So what's this growth going to require? Well, it's going to require working capital. You've got to build the inventory. You've got to hold the inventory. You've got to hold the receivables. And all of that requires cash. And it requires cash long before you're going to receive the cash for the sale of it. So in this example, if you take a look at the required working capital change year over year. So in the first year, you need to hit that 1.9 million, 2 million in sales. You need $614,000 in capital. This is rough estimates. There's going to be peaks and valleys in every cash flow. And I want to come back to this later. But you're subsidizing and supporting the loss, and you're also subsidizing and building inventory and AR. But year over year, that required working capital, especially in those first 2 years when you have no positive net income to offset it, is growing. And so to get to that $50 million rate, you're looking at needing an injection of somewhere around $11 or $12 million in capital. That's a big difference. Now the business looks a little bit different on paper than it did if you just look at the top line. So it's important as you start looking at whether it's a new potential channel that you're exploring, whether it's a new retailer, you want to look deeply at what does it mean to my cash? What does it mean to the amount of money I'm going to have at my disposal in order to get it? And are there smarter ways, better ways, more efficient ways to leverage that growth and maybe even slow that growth down? So I'll leave it to Ashley will share our next tip.
Hey, Elliot, I waited a whole slide to interrupt you, but
I'm proud of you, Gary.
yeah, thank you. But let me quickly remind viewers that we have a handy cash flow forecasting tool that we use with the Hirshberg Entrepreneurship Institute and Carlene will post the link. At various times along the way in Stonyfield's and my life, I've had to forecast not just on an annual or a monthly or a weekly, but literally on a daily basis. And this is a tool that we evolved that really shines a light on this, the implications of what Elliot and Ashley are sharing. So that link will be up in a little bit. Go ahead, Ashley, sorry.
No problem. Feel free to jump in at any point. So we are, I think Carlene took over, so we could go ahead just a couple of slides back to the top 10 tips. That would be great. One more. Perfect. So our second tip is every decision has cash implications. And so every decision you make is going to be reflected in your cash. Oh no, if we go back, there we go, just stay on that. So it's critical to develop a strong go-to-market strategy and then line it up with your budget because they're going to work synergistically. And your strategy and every decision you make, therefore, is going to be reflected in every single line item of your budget. So translating that into cash, you'll see how every line item is a reflection of your strategy. So this starts at the top. For example, your revenue is going to be a reflection of how you decide to go to market regarding your distribution, whether it's e-commerce or retail. And then moving down in each line item, your net revenue, for example, is going to depend on your channel strategy. You'll have trade spend, slotting, discounts, promos, etc. And then moving down your budget, your resources, for example, that you're going to use to execute on your go-to-market strategy are going to show up in your overhead. And those decisions will be around outsourcing or insourcing. And so it's really important to think about how all the pieces fit together strategically first, and then make sure you have them lined up in your budget. And so you'll need to make decisions on what to spend your money on, as well as what not to spend your money on. And the tighter and more robust your strategy, the easier those decisions are going to be. And so the last thing I'll note around kind of this particular tip is that you should have a goal in mind. So what milestones are you looking to achieve in the next 6, 12, 18 months? And then how are you going to allocate your cash in order to really get to those milestones and that goal?
And I'm going to build on that before I jump to number 3. And Gary somewhat stole my thunder, because this is where I was going to mention that cash flow worksheet. What's critical to understand is every single decision that you make has a cash implication. And if you just ignore it, or if you don't have it viscerally in front of you when you make that decision, what seems like a small, inconsequential decision today could be the one that bites you 6 months, a year down the road. And so I encourage everybody, regardless of where you are in your business life cycle, to take the time to be building and using a worksheet like the one Gary has in the HEI site, that makes the cash flow a living, breathing organism. Because too often what you do, especially as you get a little bit more mature, is you just generate a cash flow report. And it's different from actually putting the inputs in there and looking at that versus taking a snapshot at a moment in time. And you want to look for, where are my cliffs? Where are my risks? And what is this decision I'm making right now? And it could be a new hire. It could be, producing more inventory, because if I run it at this level, I get a better margin. It could be investing in a marketing campaign. It could be, saying yes to new distribution. All of those things have implications. Knowing how that impacts you today, but more importantly, knowing how that impacts you 6 months from now is critical. So,
and I also quickly say, because this comes up time and again with the Institute, if the time to be doing this is before you have the need, right? I mean, Ashley sort of just said this, but it's too late if you're in a place of need to start your forecasting. And the problem is most entrepreneurs are, what I call pathologically optimistic, right? We assume, Elliot, you call it a cliff, which is a good way of looking at it. People should visualize it. We assume, well, we'll get to the cliff and we'll cross that bridge when we get there, or there'll be wings waiting for us. And that's usually where we crash.
Well, and I'll add to it, Gary. I think a lot of people don't even realize there's a cliff coming until their toes are tickling over the edge of it. And then it's that, oh shit moment. What do I do now? And that's where we make a lot of our bad decisions, or those decisions that we learn to later regret. So there's none of us are clairvoyant, but working your cash flow and asking the question, what does this decision mean to me today, tomorrow, 6 months from now in terms of cash, gives you as much insight into your business as any other thing that you can do, any other question that you can ask.
I 100%. Yeah, agree. And it's not about, let me do my strategy and my budget separately. It's how do I take my strategy and then reflect it in my budget and see how my cash is impacted, and see how all those decisions are really, build on top of each other, or have kind of implications that you're going to be aware of as you kind of layer it into your budget. They're just not separate activities.
Yep. Okay. So shot number 2 here. Capital efficiency is the new velocity. So we're 2 drinks in. Let me first operationally define what I mean when I speak to capital efficiency. What I'm talking about here is for every dollar deployed, how many contribution margin dollars does it create? And I promise you, the more efficient you are in converting the cash and capital you deploy into positive contribution margin, the more effective and successful you're going to be. If we go to the next slide, Carlene, I can kind of delve a little bit deeper into that. One more down. There you go. So it's okay. We can go back up. The order is a little bit different. You can just go back to where we were, and I'll talk about it. What I'm specifically saying here is, historically, as an industry, we've been running after velocity and after doors. Those are the two things, especially as we look at brick and mortar, and those are very, very measurable, tangible results that we can use to assuage our own concerns about the trajectory of our business. They're also, quite frankly, driven by many investors who want to know the answer to that and want to see the traction of velocity and all of that. But there's a shift afoot, and this isn't just my thinking. This is my conversation with lots of investors, lots of entrepreneurs, about this concept that it isn't just about the velocity that you create and this forward-facing, this growth mentality. It's about how effective and efficient you are in creating it. So what you need to really be questioning is, where are you going to win? Where are you going to succeed? And how do you do it in the most effective manner? How do you take a dollar and make it work harder for you? And that may necessitate you slowing that arc of growth down. That may necessitate that you say no to a new piece of distribution. It may necessitate making some hard choices as to, do you spend more to drive your own website versus Amazon, or do you cull some of the SKUs in your portfolio because the bottom 30% are dragging down everything else? You have to make a commitment to exploring every way possible to make every dollar you deploy do more work for you. And what happens if you do that? First of all, you get further on less. And if you get further on less, that means less dilution for you. That means more freedom in decision making. That means more resilience, so that when things happen, as things do, you're able to withstand them better. So I would really encourage everybody to ask that question. If I'm going to spend a dollar, what's my path, and how many incremental contribution margin dollars does it make me? Ashley.
And arguably, the best way to be capital efficient is to generate healthy margins, because that just flows directly to your bottom line. So the quicker you can get to healthy product margins, the more sustainable you'll be, and the more you can fund your own growth. And so,
Madeline, I can see you've got a comment.
I do. I think when I read these things, your route to market is one of the biggest decisions. Your route to market and your pricing are like the two biggest things that people can control, because it goes towards your capital efficiency. If for example, you choose e-commerce, well, you don't need brokers, you don't need distributors, you don't need merchandising agents, you don't need, all of the things you need to scale. And by the way, as you grow in retail, you need to hire more sales team, you need to hire more people to support, versus like e-com. So like a route to market has different cash implications, it has different gross margins, it has the ability to scale. So it's really one of the things that is really important for you to do. And then pricing also is something too. But the thing about it that I'm just going to say is that when you have a new product, when you're a new brand, when you have an tested price, it's really important for you to find ways where it's like, okay, if you go out wrong, if your gross margin's too low, or if your price is too high and it hasn't resonated, like how can you change that? Well, it's much harder to change that in retail. And you're going to have to wait 90 days, to change it anyways. And meanwhile, you're again going back to working capital. So I would say everything that Ashley and Elliot are saying is very important to think about. And I would say one of the critical pieces that you can affect that will encompass these things is being very thoughtful on your route to market. And it may not always be e-commerce. I'm a little bit biased there because I see a lot of benefits, but there are a lot of attendees here where they may not have a product that is suitable or compatible with e-com, and they need to find their best route to market.
Super.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Go on, Ashley.
completely agree. And I think you bring up a point which I was going to kind of touch on. So it's a great dovetail in margins. It's not only about your kind of product margin, it's about your account level margin and your true fully burdened contribution margin. And you have to understand that in every channel, not just kind of overall and blended, but really understand what your margin is per channel, per retailer, so that you can know what decisions you're making, and make sure that you're making the right decision. I mean, there might be a good reason that you're taking distribution and taking a lower margin, but you just need to know that that's the decision you're making ahead of time, and that you are going to burn some more cash doing that. But I encourage all of our founders to be ruthless with margins as early as you can. So, we've had portfolio companies where founders are more loose and then have had to make really, really, really hard decisions later, cutting distribution when they didn't want to, because they just didn't have an insight into kind of what those account level margins were. And then we've had founders who are upfront and very, very ruthless with every single margin decision that they made. And it really did redound to their benefit over time. I mean, we have one portfolio company that's chose the e-commerce route. It's a direct-to-consumer meal delivery company. And I know the CEO had come to board meetings every time, so it was such excitement every time he saved 1% on food costs or $2,000 on a shipping contract. And, that might not be the best use of a board meeting, but at the end of the day, it really enabled him to develop best-in-class unit economics. And he was able to get to a 9-figure run rate with $12 million of primary capital. So he was able to really scale that business without taking a lot of capital because he was just so ruthless at every single dollar he saved. So would encourage everyone to kind of be capital efficient through understanding their margin profile really, really deeply.
I just want to quickly comment one little thread here, because you guys have done it. These first points are just so, I mean, we could stop right here, right? And just delve in with lots of anecdotes. But just this week, I had a guy pitching me to invest in his company. And he said, look, I'm apologizing now for my gross margins in the early going, but I've got this sort of hockey stick kind of, with volume, this is what's going to happen. And I said, well, I'll take a look at the product. And I went online to order it. And his anemic gross margins were at a price that was already ridiculous, right? Like there's not going to be a future, because it was just like choking to see what it costs. So to your exact point, Ashley, this is not, and to Madeline's comment a second ago, this is not just about cost of goods. Obviously your price has to more than cover, but this is about being sure that you really know the price that's going to be working out there before you start making commitments. And the last thing I'll say very fast, which Elliot alluded to a moment ago, I just need to highlight, is there's a huge difference between what you say your price is going to be and what it actually ends up being. Someone in the chat already asked if you could share some of your assumptions about in the forecasting. And assumption number one is take a big bite out of trade spend, especially nowadays. Because what you're actually going to collect versus what you're asking for, it's going to be a world of difference, right?
Yeah, and just a few follow-ups on that. First of all, I think listen to Madeline's coaching. I mean, she's lived this. The two things that I would encourage everyone watching this today to do is one is always run a waterfall of every new transactional activity, and by that I mean start with the price that you're going to command. If that's wholesale, it's wholesale. If it's e-com, it's retail. And literally go down and take everything out that's coming out, all the hands in the cookie jar that are coming out. So obviously COGS, obviously trade spend, acquisition, just all the way down. And then look at what that bottom line contribution is of that decision. And then add to that how long that cash conversion cycle will take. How long will it take to convert the inventory that you're selling into the cash that you're putting in the bank? And I promise you that it'll give you a different view of what to say yes to and what to say no. The other thing that I want to encourage is for all of you to adopt a growth hack mentality. So instead of making big bets, in your go-to-market strategy, take some of the assumptions that you are using to build your strategy and find small controlled experiments, ways you can test it, to find it, to either prove it or disprove it, but disprove it in a way that's not an existential threat to your business. How many times have we seen brands take big bets and have it not work, but that not work has created this, incredible burden or threat to their long-term viability of their business. You can do things in smaller chunks. You can isolate, comparable events in different ways and pick variables to test, growth hack, do those kind of things, especially while you're smaller, so that you can learn. So
Can I?
Yeah,
can I just
e-commerce is a
you?
great channel for that. Oh, go ahead, Madeline. I was going to say e-commerce is a great channel for kind of testing and learning.
So I never want to forget what it was like for me. And I didn't come from this industry, and I didn't know what a lot of these acronyms are. And I certainly didn't have the financial acumen that, I've had to learn. And so what I would say is this, because I remember Bob Burke, Natural Products Institute, was like, it was a couple grand to go to one of his seminars. God, it's like $3,000. I don't have $3,000. I got to buy packaging. But I'm going to tell you what Bob told me. And I thought it was self-serving, but it is 1000% true, is that you need to invest in learning this stuff. You need to invest in learning how to knit together your finances as your business. It is as important as we obsess about our marketing, about our packaging, about our taglines. You need to really know this stuff as much as you're going to know your operations, because you can't get it wrong. It's so hard for you to undo and redo when you're out in the market. So take the hit, make sure that you invest in learning about these things, because this is your business, and you can finesse other areas. You can finesse your marketing, you can finesse your packaging, you can finesse, other things, but you're really going to have to just bite the bullet and learn the stuff that you're not comfortable learning about financially, how to run and how to build this business. And so I just want to say one more thing. It's hard because you're out of, some of you may be out of your comfort zone and you don't know all this stuff. You certainly can't run all of these analysis that Elliot and Ashley are saying that you guys should do, and you should do them. So you should engage a consultant. You should educate yourself, and there's no optionality here. You have to learn it.
Agree. Elliot,
and I think vulnerability is a huge strength in a founder. The willingness to say, I don't know, I need to learn, is a huge strength. And this industry is filled with people who will take you by the hand when you make those kind of admonitions and support you and help you. So by the way, the generator power in here it's dimming. So if I'm getting darker and darker, I apologize, but I'm
Elliot, do you want to head on to number 5 then before we lose you?
Yeah, no, I'm not going anywhere. I'm like bad luggage. You're stuck with me. Number 5 is discern between the important and the interesting. I'm going to illustrate this one with a great story. A friend of mine, Lou Jaffe, who now teaches entrepreneurship at LMU University, he and his partner were the early inventors of what is now what we're on, Zoom. but it was the first, they figured out how to compress simultaneously both audio and video to allow for scaled video conferencing. And this was in the 80s. And so they had an opportunity to present to a large VC on Sand Hill Road. And so Lou was doing the presentation with the VC, and his partner was back in their office in Boston. And so Lou shows up with this really clunky, cumbersome looking piece of equipment and goes to set it up. And a well-meaning associate of the VC says, you know, this is really ugly, especially the bottom half. Let's drape it in a table skirt, a tablecloth, just to make it look better, so that when the general partners walk in, you know, it feels better. So they do it, and they start the video conference. What Lou failed to tell this well-meaning associate is that this big, huge, clunky machine puts out the equivalent BTUs of a barbecue. And so within a few minutes, that tablecloth actually catches fire. And they're running through and having to use a fire extinguisher and put it out, leaves a big smoke, you know, hole on the carpet. And Lou, you know, but this is, you know, his partner's, you know, talking away on the video conference, unaware of this going on. And so Lou is just absolutely you know, he's just devastated. And all he kept saying to his partner is, I cannot believe we started a fire in that VC's office. I cannot believe we started this fire. And all his partner kept saying was, we just had the first coast-to-coast video call. We just successfully had the first coast-to-coast video call. And his story, when he told this to me, the point of it was, I was caught up on what was interesting, really interesting that we started a fire. But what was important is that we had this successful first. And so we get caught up as entrepreneurs in the interesting. We're like squirrels chasing our next nuts. And what that does is it makes us completely ineffective and inefficient. And it's a really great place for our cash to find a home. We have to be linear. We have to really discern, is this something that is just interesting to pursue, this new SKU, this new, you know, extension into this new category, this new channel of business? Is it interesting, or is it really important? Is it going to get us to that next level? And if it's just interesting, you have to let it go. So that's my story.
Hey, so, but was setting the cloth on fire, was that an effective way to raise the money? Did they get?
They did get the money. They did get the money.
Okay.
So, yeah.
There's another hint right there.
That's it.
Burn the place up.
Burn it down. Burn it down. Ashley?
Yeah. After that story, I'll have to get back to cash. So watch the sixth one is really watch out for sneaky ways cash can creep up on you. And so we've been touching on this throughout as we're talking about kind of capital efficiency, but often founders aren't really thinking about the true cost of selling the product. And we've alluded to this kind of several times, but really have an honest assessment of what it takes to sell, because there are certain ways that, you know, you'll have your costs that will kind of bite you in the end if you're not aware of them ahead of time, such as slotting fees or other trade spends, logistics costs, fulfillment. And so it gets back to kind of a point we were making earlier around, is all distribution good distribution? You know, you're going to have to make decisions around your distribution, and just make sure you're understanding what the true costs are to sell before you go ahead and make the decision to go, you know, into certain retailers, and make sure all of your kind of unit economics are fully baked.
Ashley,
and also,
quick question for you. No, I just want to ask you a quick question about that. Yeah. I mean, there's people on the webinar, I'm sure, who have no idea how to know that. Like, what's your coaching comment? How do I know, you know, UNFI comes along and says, you know, we're going to do A, B, C, D, E. Look, a bunch of people just raised their hand when I said, how do you guys suggest people get that kind of information?
Yeah, I mean, I think you just have to model it out. So our founders and our portfolio companies, you know, take distribution and they'll let's say they're going into Target, they'll fully burden that Target with all of the costs that are going to be required. And some portfolio companies, unfortunately, don't do that until they're capital constrained. And they're like, shoot, I've got to make hard decisions because I got to get to break even. And then they realize that some of these accounts were unprofitable. But I encourage everyone to kind of do that up front. And you can kind of model out what your trade spend is going to be to grow into Kroger or Target, or name your kind of distribution. And then you should know your logistics costs and your fulfillment costs. You're likely going to be at kind of less than truckload initially, and will have kind of higher shipping costs. And so you're just going to have to understand what those kind of account level economics are. And so I'd say that on kind of one hand, and then on the other hand, I'd understand what you are projecting your payback to be and really monitor that over time, because some distribution you want to take and you want to spend the dollars up front to get in, but you just have to make sure that payback isn't too long where it's really unprofitable for you.
But your response is that you got to know that stuff, which is, and forecast conservatively, which are both excellent points. But I mean, I'm asking concretely, like, who can people turn to?
Turn to your peers.
Turn to other companies in your kind of network who would know that. You can turn to your co-packer who might have an idea. You can ask UNFI. You should know your shipping costs. I mean, those you're kind of in charge of. And
I would also say in terms of slotting, your trade partners, like your brokers, should be able to help you out. Your sales team should be able to help you out if they're experienced. You can also talk to different industry consultants as well. And I think when Ashley's talking about a payback period, it's like if it costs you $100,000 in slotting, which, oh my gosh, sometimes it does. And I didn't believe that when I started out. How long is it going to take for you to get that back before you actually start making money on that? So I know when Ashley's saying it's not too long. So I would say every company is different. I would say there might be differences among different categories. For us, we like 6 months payback period. We may go up to 9 months for, say, a really good retailer for us. But if it stretches out 9 to 12 months, then you might have to take a look at passing. And we do a fair amount of passing because either the retailer isn't, say, for example, a really good retailer for plant-based, or they don't have the right demographics and their consumers that are going to, really be successful with this product. Pass on those retailers. You need to know who your top tier 1 retailers are, where it's like, we've got to get in. And then you also have to be able to be okay to say, like, I don't want to spend $50,000 and just have so velocities. And it's going to take me a year just to get a payback period. So, those are some of the things that you'll need.
And just to add, I mean, first of all, you want to ask your fellow founders, you want to ask your category managers, you want to ask your supplier relations, you want to ask everyone up and down the supply chain. What am I not thinking about? What am I missing? The other thing all of you need to have around you is a good contrarian. I say that somewhat tongue in cheek, but I'm saying it also with a degree of sincerity. You want that person who's sitting alongside you, because of Gary's point of the fact that we tend to be, as entrepreneurs, pathologically optimistic. We need that person who's going to say, nah, that ain't going to work. That ain't going to work. And so that then you can have that conversation about why is it not going to work? So you can think through those things. Because it's
that person, Elliot, should be your CFO, because an entrepreneur
ideally,
needs to have that, like, we're just gonna get around the corner and it's gonna be, you need to have that.
Everyone needs a good contrarian on their team. Truly, you need that. And sometimes that's the person you want to strangle, but it's a really, really valuable person. And you just have to try to think about those unintended consequences and ask. Don't be afraid to ask everybody, get opinion, get all of those things. And to just to follow up, Madeline, on your example about payback on free fills, it's also really important to have that dialogue with the category manager. How much time do I have? What is the hurdle rate? What's the threshold velocity that I need to? make sure that if you're going in there thinking I'm going to do the free fills, and if I just hit 3 units per SKU per store per week, I'm golden, and they're thinking I need 12, you're setting yourself up for failure. And if you're thinking you're going to get a year to do it and they're thinking you're going to get 6 months, you're setting yourself up for failure. Level set those expectations day one before you make your decision. So.
And in the chat, folks, there's a consultant who's does this for a living, Deborah, and she's offering her contact info.
It's great.
And one more thing I just want to say is, the slotting is negotiable. The free fills sometimes are negotiable too. But for those diverse suppliers, meaning like you can have your women-owned certification and you can have your minority-owned certification. If you go through and you have the certification, some retailers will give you tangible financial benefits to do so. Like, for example, Kroger, we don't pay slotting. We don't pay slotting at Target as well. Now, unfortunately, they're kind of few and far in between, but you should leverage those because it really helps you be able to save money.
Yeah.
Yeah, take advantage of everything you can, 100%, and look for those, opportunities to leverage them.
So we'll move on to number 7, which is, raise capital ahead of when you need it. So going to the well before you need the water. Listen, if you needed an example of this in real life, just look at what's happened since the outbreak of the pandemic. I will tell you that the founders and the brands that had cultivated relationships with their investors prior to had a substantially easier time of raising the money during this time than those that were first starting to build those relationships over Zoom. You are going to hear from the vast majority of investors, especially if you're in that seed stage or pre-seed stage, you're too early. But that doesn't mean that relationship stops until you're not. That's the starting point of a relationship that you need to start establishing. These are people that, you need to keep involved in your journey. And there are a lot of ways that they can help beyond just funding you in that interim period. They have, they could have interested LPs who are willing to be angels, but they also can open doors. They can connect you with people. So even when somebody says that, it's the start of cultivation. You should always be working on your next raise while you're working on your current raise and building that momentum, building those relationships, because the worst time to be going to investors for money is when you actually need that money now. It puts you in a real disadvantage. And I'm not talking that it's because of predatory behavior. That's not at all what I'm intimating. It's just that you aren't going to be as clear-minded. Every no that you hear is going to be more devastating. It's going to take more wind out of your sail. It's going to feel like a much slower, longer slog to do it. And you're going to be in a situation where you're trying to run your business and fund your business simultaneously, and both will suffer. So part of raising capital is having, so the brands we work with, we put a 5-year capital strategy together. We look 5 years out and when and where and what structures are going to need to be raised. Now it changes because things happen, but we're always thinking about what are we doing to cultivate year 5 while we're in the midst of year 1? What are we doing to cultivate year 2, 3, and 4 while we're in the early days, so that when we get to those years, those relationships are there and it's much easier to do it. So please raise every round of capital now. That just have that mindset and always be raising. So
yeah, I'll add one point around that. Just from the investor side, I would think about 100% cultivating your next round while you're in your current round. And then the second thing I would think about doing is keeping your current investors involved. So really leverage them. I mean, they can be helpful to you on a day-to-day basis, but it will enable them to see your evolution and see how the business has evolved. And if you are in kind of getting into a cash crunch or you're starting to raise capital and you want them to start seeding it, the more you keep them involved and the more you keep them engaged, the more likely you will have a really strong internal pool of investors on which to call from, which will give you a little bit of cushion, but it will also put you in a position of power when you're going to raise your next round. So always keep your current investor base kind of engaged and interested.
Super. Let me just tell you, we're getting an avalanche. You're clearly hitting a lot of sensitivity points because we're getting an avalanche of questions, which is great. And I want to get to them. So let me try to let you get through the last three.
Yeah, we can go quick. So this will be a quick one. 3 jobs your CEO, to kind of piggyback on Elliot's point, is set the vision, hire great people, and raise capital. So I can't emphasize enough that if you're planning to raise outside capital, treat it as a primary job. All entrepreneurs think capital is like this thing they have to do that's a nuisance on the business, when they're actually, what they want to do is run the business. And if you're going to raise outside capital, that can't be the case. You have to run a process. It has to be a primary job. It has to be something you're very focused on. And this is one of those primary things you do day in and day out. And so think of it as a core job, and everything else outside kind of those 3 tasks can be outsourced. And so those are kind of your 3 that you should focus on. And then Elliot, discipline.
Yeah, and I'll jump into this one, which my mother always finds funny that I still reference discipline because I was the most undisciplined kid. Discipline wins, everybody. It's that simple. The more rigor you put into your business, the more rigor that you put against all of these things that we've described today, the greater your chances are of succeeding. And if we can, Carlene, just go to the next slide really quick, and I'll hit 2 quick slides here. I just want to make points. We celebrate in this industry this concept of the unicorn, and I don't want to throw shade on a unicorn because that isn't the intent. Unicorns are fantastic, but they're rare and they're somewhat mythical. And if your pursuit is that, then you have the opportunity of great upside, but you also have a much greater propensity for failure. And so I want to say that discipline is around being this tardigrade. It's around being really nimble and capital efficient and resilient. And if we go to this last slide, I'll talk about what discipline really means. It first of all means that you're disciplined and committed to keeping your team small and agile. The bigger you grow your team, the faster you grow your team unnecessarily, the bigger the mouth to feed, the bigger your fixed costs are, and it just makes life difficult. So you want the right team around you, but you want a challenge that everybody can do more and that you're agile and able to adjust. You need to be e-com enabled in this world. And Madeline is a fabulous example, a pioneer of it, actually. You need to be e-com enabled, both D2C and B2B. You just have to be in today's world. You have to be disciplined around your channel and unit economics. We've talked about that ad nauseum today. You have to make sure that you are constantly digging deep into what your economics are, understanding them, intimately. And to the earlier points made, if you don't get that, if you don't understand that, get help. And get the help to get that done. There are a lot of people in this industry that will help you. You need to be, you need to have a curated, disciplined approach to retail. I mean, I think of retail like the drums of Jumanji. I mean, you hear that beat, grow, 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 more doors, more doors. And it's really hard to be disciplined enough to know your no's, to say, I'm not ready for this opportunity, or I don't think I can succeed in this opportunity. Do it. Look for your no's. Write them down on the piece of paper. If I don't get this kind of merchandising, if I'm not going to have this access, if these consumers aren't here, or I have to spend this much in slotting, I'm going to say no. And just pick the places you can win. Again, a short cash conversion cycle. You need to understand how quickly you turn cash and make decisions. And that's a balance with channel strategy, from an Amazon strategy to your own Shopify, to going through wholesale. What's the right balance? Use your tribe, use digital to build your tribe. And this last one about discipline, you have to be disciplined around discovery. Okay. This industry will get you on shelves, especially brick and mortar. You can prop up a website, you can get into Amazon, but if you don't have a disciplined approach to driving discovery and trial to get people engaged with you, then the rest doesn't matter. And it's the fastest place to see money getting sucked out. So, and then Ashley, I'll leave it to you to bring us home with number 10.
Yeah. Number 10 are deceptively simple. Don't run out of cash. So I know it sounds tautological, but like it's often just not heeded. So we have to reiterate it multiple times. And so cash flow is all about looking ahead. And I think that's like one of the most important things to think about when you're thinking about kind of your cash. How do you look ahead? So I encourage you to always have a 13-week cash projection that you're consistently managing and updating week to week. Our strongest entrepreneurs are consistently use their 13-week cash projection to manage the business. And they manage every single decision around that. And I would say that I would do this today, tomorrow, because you don't want to do it when you're running out of cash. I mean, you certainly need to do it when you're running out of cash, but the more you get ahead of it, the better off you'll be. And so I kind of always joke that we should start our board meetings with one slide. That's just how much runway do you have? Because often entrepreneurs will come to board meetings and we'll have this great strategic discussion. And then the last slide will be, well, we're going to run out of cash in 3 to 6 months. So we're going to go launch a capital raise. And everyone's like, wait, what? You can't really execute on your strategy if you're going to run out of cash. So just have that front and center. And I think that will help you kind of make sure that you're in a good cash position overall. And then I would say one just last point is related to that, is thinking about ways you can partner with your vendors to save cash. So I would see your suppliers more as partners rather than kind of your adversaries and your enemies. And before you're facing a cash crunch, try to get ahead of it by having discussions with them. They likely don't want to lose your business. So they might be receptive to, finding ways that you can kind of save cash together and partner with you kind of over the long term.
Yeah,
that's just kind of practical.
So listen, first of all, wonderful job, you guys. This is obviously jam-packed and it's clear from the questions. We have 2 hours of discussion. We could have 2 hours of discussion ahead. I want to say on that last point, Ashley, at a point of real darkness for me, I got 6 months of forward credit by my biggest supplier, which I was then able to roll into a note and pay back over 2 years. I mean, it was essentially the equivalent of venture capital. They literally let me take 6 months of goods up front and then pay back over time. So really important point. We have a tough job.
You have to ask,
Yeah, we have a tough job here because we've got a lot of important questions and some are for you, Madeline, as well. So let me in no particular order start to rattle through them and let's do the best job we can here. But I do want to say right away, this session has been recorded and it will be up and live at the Hirshberg Entrepreneurship Institute site. So don't worry if there's points back earlier that you want to get to. And I do want to also underscore a comment that Todd Beckman slipped into the Q&A, which is, we've been talking about all the things we can forecast, but don't forget the things that we can't, the unauthorized deductions, right, from customers, which is a huge cash drain. And, to your earliest point about forecasting and knowing, because, shit's going to happen. This is why the advice that you've been getting with all these 9 points are so critical, because this is insulation against things that are going to happen, that are to be total surprises to you, no matter how good you are at forecasting.
Gary, I always recommend building an oh shit line on your forecast, truthfully, and putting some percentage in there just for the unforeseen and making sure you have that contingency.
Yeah, and a bunch of the questions are going to, what are the exact assumptions that we should be using for trade spend? And obviously it's very category specific and we can't answer, those kinds of questions. But what I would say is that, and Carlene will put it up again, the link to the cash flow sheet. If you don't already have a tool like this, put it to work and start using it. Start with your on an every day, every week basis, inputting the actual numbers, because it allows you to forecast what you think is going to happen and then record what actually happened. And you can learn, to Elliot's earlier point, from your own optimism. Deborah says Deborah says I'm paying 2 times more for pilot runs for my beverage. Is it worth considering 100% loss, as I'm just trying to get into doors? So, here she is, early going. She's in this very unprofitable place. Effectively, she knows the things that we're talking about. She knows it's going to be a huge cash drain, but at the same time, she's got to get the product out there. What would you guys say to Deborah?
I mean, first of all, I don't know all the specifics, but there's kind of an axiom that I believe, and that is first loss is best loss. So if there is nothing that you can, no path forward where you see profitability, knowing the loss that you have going in versus not knowing what the loss could be or trying to mitigate it, it's usually the first that winds up being the better scenario. But the thing that I would encourage, and listen, a lot of brands find themselves in this when they look at their contribution. At the end of the day, it's negative contribution in the early days. If that is true, then you have to think about the fact that every time you say yes to a piece of distribution, you're making an investment. So the question isn't yes because it's growth. The question should be, is this a good investment? And if you feel it's a good investment because it's giving you, proof of traction, proof of product market fit, it's going to establish you and your ability to articulate this for future growth and getting to those MOQs and getting to scale, then yes. If it's just vanity, if it's just getting into a door and having an opportunity, then no.
So, go ahead, Ashley. Yeah.
Oh, I'd say, first I'd understand, is there a path to getting to scale? And I would start talking to other co-packers if there isn't really a strong path to getting to scale. And then the second thing I'd say is, how much capital do you have? Can you even sustain 100% loss? And how long can you sustain that? I think it's important to understand how long, because if you don't have the cash to sustain this, then you might be out of luck.
And Gary, can I make one other quick add to that?
Please.
Don't bullshit yourself. I hear this all the time. People look at their ramp up and they say, when I get to X volume, that's when my gross profit is going to hit the number I need it to. There's a flaw in that thinking, and that as you grow scale and ubiquity, what also typically comes is price compression. So you rarely ever achieve that incremental gross profit. So you got to really understand, to Ashley's point, is there a path to profitability at the transactional level?
Okay.
I think volume tiers are a good way when you're talking to co-packers, having them give you volume tiers for pricing.
Mm-hmm.
I do want to say it can be great if you treat your vendors and your suppliers as partners. And, I'm sure in the first year or two, I really wanted to give away some of my company just to ensure that I had a co-packer. I am not with my original co-packer, and you may find that is common. And so the co-packer that you end up with may not be the one that you want to be with in the long term. So, you want to be careful about offering equity. And the other thing too is you want to have as you grow, and we all want to grow, you want to be able to have competing co-packers. So then you have some competition in pricing. And so if you have one that's advantaged, and that's painful, I get it. All this source friend of the co-packer, you're lucky to have one to take your startup, one to take a chance on you. But you got to go through the painful process. And I would just say, in all areas of a startup and seed round, the more you can get over obstacles, it means your competitor behind you has to get over that same obstacle too. And
Yeah.
so
for Deborah, just to summarize, what I think we're saying is, if you've got the capital, if you've got the path, and you have the strategy lined up in terms of the co-packing, at least to get you through that first leg, then Sure, if that investment makes sense, great, but obviously don't do it if you're, going to the edge of that cliff and you don't have a parachute waiting for you. We're getting a lot of questions about, people are clearly taking seriously your guys' admonishment about capital efficiency, but they're asking for benchmarks on gross and net margins. And of course, so I'm going to combine a couple of questions because the question Michael and Paloma are asking, what's a good range to give for distributors, for example? Where should you ideally be in terms of your gross margin? But the real question he's asking is, how can he get benchmarks to know what makes sense in his category? This is getting at the question I was putting to you, Ashley, a moment ago. And a corollary to that is what Paloma is asking, which is what margin ranges are considered healthy versus unhealthy to a prospective investor after baking in trade spend. So maybe you could speak to those two. Anybody?
Sure, I'll jump in, Ashley. I mean, the first thing is you can get benchmarks again by asking peers and doing all of those things. But I want to caution you that benchmarks are just benchmarks, and you can grab benchmarks that are bad ones. I would start first by discerning based on your financials and your waterfall, what margins do you need to get to profitability and what works for you. And start there, and then compare to where you're being asked to be at in order to get a yes from the location that you're doing. I mean, as a rule of thumb, it's very category specific and after trade, but you can look at what your net contribution, and it comes down to, again, how nimble you are, how quickly you convert your cash, how small and agile. But I would be somewhat I think it'd be a disservice if I gave you some rules of thumb without knowing the category and all of that, but also because it doesn't really matter. If I tell you that, a good rule of thumb post-trade is a 40% gross, but you need 60 because of what you have underneath, below the line in order to be break even, then I'm not doing you any good. So you need to determine that. The most important thing that I would say, especially as you go out and growth hack and do it, if you're going to be wrong charging too high of a price, because it's easier to work your way down. You don't always get that, and Madeline is a great example of the opposite working. But in most cases, if you're going to make a mistake on getting yourself as much margin as you can.
Okay. Bob Burks also, again, keep your eyes on the chat, folks. Bob's offering a couple of suggestions. MJ asks, corollary to the other two questions I just expressed, what are considered ideal trade spend levels as a percentage of sales for emerging food brands? Madeline, do you have I mean, obviously trade spend is the least controllable expense right now, particularly during the pandemic with desperate retailers. Do you have a ballpark that you use for yourself?
Yeah. I think for us, when we launched, we were like, I want to say 18-20% in like the accounts where we launched nationwide Kroger. We heavily promoted there to make sure that we had a success there, because I needed a velocity. I needed a case study there. And so Sprouts will have you like invest in your brand too. Right now we're about 14%.
Yeah, I'd say from our experience, it's around 20 to 25 when a brand is young, and then hopefully you can leverage that trade spend to decrease it over time.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So I'm going to jump around because there's all different kinds of questions. And should I be raising capital while I'm still at a seed level?
So I think what I would say is I have raised everything from convertible notes to short to like promissory notes to family and friends. And yes, seed, it's bloody. It costs you a lot. Your pre-money valuation is really low, but if you're not profitable, so you can't get a line of credit. If you're like most startup entrepreneurs like me, your credit cards are already maxed out. So, and when you go and have, say, an office building, you might have to like personally guarantee those suckers. And so I think the answer is yes, unless you have a lot of money from a previous venture and you're a serial entrepreneur, then you should plan on raising money. And you should plan on raising money. But bootstrap as much as you can, and don't go into it raising like, okay, I'm going to raise like a $4 million round. Like raise a $300,000 round to get you to the milestones in which you say, okay, this is what I've proved with 300,000. The next round I want to prove is we're going to get to here, and it's going to take me like 1.2 million.
Yeah.
Raise what you need, not what you, and what you can deploy effectively. And let me also just say that there's a difference between the act of raising and the actual yes of raising. So you can always be in the act of raising and having conversations, but unless it's, you know, unless it's meeting your terms and meeting your needs, you don't have to say yes. But I would be building to the earlier point, just continually be going to the well before you need the water. Just keep raising.
Yeah,
Ashley,
I would
were you
say,
gonna add? Go ahead. Go
yeah,
ahead.
I would say that you should definitely, you know, raise ahead of when you need it, raise the right amount. Always raise a little bit more though, because you want to give yourself that cushion, because you will always spend more than you think you're going to spend. And then my other piece of advice is at the seed stage and the early stage through the Series A, you're going to take some dilution, but I wouldn't be as concerned about that as I would about raising a large amount of capital at a very high valuation before you know it works. So I would rather you take, you know, a smaller amount of money at a lower valuation, or even a slightly larger amount of money at a lower valuation, take some more dilution, but give yourself the flexibility to figure it out and make some mistakes early. Because if you raise it too high a valuation, you don't grow into it, you're going to have a really hard time in the next round, raising that next round. So
Yeah. And just really quick, and also you got to have a plan for it. You got to have a plan for every dollar you're going to take in, how you're going to deploy it to make it worth more, to grow your value. And if you don't have a plan, don't take the money.
So I'm going to combine a couple questions here that are good follow-ups. Kyle asks, there's often the stated desire to build relationships with entrepreneurs ahead of their capital raises, but oftentimes investors won't actually engage outside of an active raise, right? So what are some recommendations about how to engage future investors when you're not yet at their stage? And Ashley, a specific question is being asked about how, if there's been sort of changes in the family office approach over the past year during this crisis. So I think maybe you guys could speak to the 2 points.
Yeah, sure. I don't think you have to only, you know, engage investors when you're raising specifically capital. And you can always say, hey, I'm going to be raising in 6 months. I really want to talk to you about kind of my plans now, and build that kind of momentum with the investor. You know, always have kind of a plan to go raise before you engage them, but it doesn't have to be specifically, I'm raising today. You just want to kind of start building that momentum in those conversations. And then you could also say, I mean, one little trick too is, oh, I have a note open before I close my round. And you can kind of get in the door that way and see if the investor will bite. On the family office approach, I mean, there hasn't really been any change on our end. Every family office is kind of like every unhappy family is unhappy in a different way. Every family office is different in their own unique kind of way. There's been no change in kind of how we operate. We operate very much like a venture fund. We're a family-backed venture fund. I've seen kind of just across the venture space though, in food, you know, capital efficiency is the name of the game. Want to see kind of strong entrepreneurs who are really scrappy and were able to weather the storm. And we don't necessarily expect that 2020 was going to go exactly how you envisioned. But want to see kind of that you were able to do some creative things this year to grow and scale.
Yeah, good counsel. And, you know, last week we talked about this. There's really been a shift in angel investing and in early stage private equity, much more about capital efficiency, much more about path to profitability and less about, you know, hockey stick growth. Madeline, I think this is mainly for you, but as you're learning the financials, this, you know, Elliot spoke, or Ashley spoke about the 3 key roles for a CEO, but as you're learning financials and getting detailed on the numbers, how much are you analyzing daily numbers versus outsourcing to a CFO or other financial team member. And I guess I'm going to extrapolate from that question to ask you all, how much do you recommend outsourcing? Since analytics is not really in the top 3 roles that Ashley, you described for the CEO earlier. So anyone want to speak to those?
I can talk a little bit about that. You have to know your business because ultimately you're the one raising money. You have to be, proficient. You have to know your numbers, I would say, but it's okay upon a founding team to have different strengths. So I happen to be married to, an investment banker, and he helped me a lot with the early cash flow and forecasts and things like that. You might have somebody who is on your founding team that is really good and that is your strength, and you can focus on selling or marketing or operations or things like that. And so there are some roles on your team where it's easier to outsource. I think, Propeller and Anshin are good options, and it helps save you from giving equity and paying salaries that you have consultants. We were like 5 people for a very long time. And so using consultants like that is a good way for you to get your feet wet. Now, there are other roles on your team, like operations. You don't want to source that. You don't want to outsource that. You need that to be on your team. You need to have that core competency on your team. So, but financial parts, especially Propeller and Anton, where they're involved in the food space, can be really worthwhile consultants.
And they can give you good benchmarks on other companies and what you should look for and what you should target. So I think outsourcing at the early stage is definitely worthwhile, but you have to own your metrics. Like, you have to know those 5 key metrics that make your business tick. And that's what you have to look at day in and day out. You can outsource kind of putting together the budget and the cash flow statement, but your metrics you should, be very comfortable with.
Yeah.
And just a really short add to that is that's a really important part. When you outsource, a lot of times those folks will come back and start using more industry lingo and industry speak. And if you don't fully understand it, make sure you really intimately know what those numbers mean, and let them be your teachers. They're usually fantastic teachers, so that your financial literacy is growing. Because and that's the same true with working with investors when Ashley spews out some term that is mind-blowing and ask, because the more you can become literate, the more balanced the dissymmetry of power and leverage is. So you can have a conversation where you're as much the giver as you are the receiver of that information. You're in a better spot.
Yeah.
And I was just going to say, this industry has so many places to learn, whether or not it's New Hope or specialty food or, my favorite consultant is Bob Burke, HEI is a great way. So there are lots of ways that you can get your feet wet in terms of learning the terminology and, 101 type of things. And then you can also engage consultants as well.
Yeah. And, again, this is a point for me to make a plug for the Institute. This is exactly what we do. We bring together folks from all kinds of disciplines. It's a great networking. So I'm going to try to quickly rattle through. There's one question I'll answer that came to me, talking about managing gross margins and profitability with my own facility versus a co-packer, and how I navigated building from a cash flow perspective. Really simple. We learned the hard way. We had to set an absolute minimum floor threshold for gross margin, or it wasn't going to go into the factory, period. And all the advice you've been hearing this whole session here was critical. We would always fool ourselves, and we got burnt time and time again because we weren't fully loading the costs. And finally, we realized, you know what, shit's going to happen. There's going to be startup costs. There's going to be shrink, and we set a minimum objective. I'll say, or we didn't take it on. And to the earlier point or the point Madeline just made a second ago, I mean, this is where our CFO came in helpful for me, because as the entrepreneur who was used to yes, I needed somebody close to me who I would respect who would say no. And that was really critical. And I had that. And how about building my own facility? This is certainly, again, really, really rough. I mean, honestly, when you're at the early stages, it's equity. So you have to ask yourself, to Elliot's earlier question, is that the right investment? Is it the right use of capital? You saw Madeline instantly, shake her head no. And I can tell you, most of my investments these days are companies who did not do it. But in our case, there was no factory. There was nobody else out there who would even touch us. We were just a crazy venture. So we did it, but it cost in a big way, which gets me to Elliot's point earlier, which is get what you need, but don't go any further. What were the have-tos that we had to have in our factory? And, we were thrifty, right? It was baling twine and bubble gum to put this thing together. Madeline, quick comment for you.
I just have to say, you complicate your business, because if you have a product and you just need to sell it, focus on marketing and branding that. Don't get into food processing and stigma and recall stuff. Like, keep your business clean and streamlined and focus on what you're good at.
100%. Elliot, what are your thoughts on D2C for frozen products?
It's doable and it's tough simultaneously. It depends on the frozen product, depends on where you sit in the market in terms of premium versus not, and if you can activate it. But there are brands doing very well in frozen D2C. I mean, Jenny Splendid is doing well, and their endeavor on D2C, and those economics are catching up. So if you can plan it right, it's never going to be easy, especially because you're out in front of it a bit, but there is opportunity. And there's some folks in the industry, if you want to ping me afterwards, I'm happy to connect you with some folks who are really good deep in this, both on the fulfillment side, execution side, and on the marketing side.
Okay.
Yeah, just a small point. We have some brands that are DTC, and we've screened a lot of brands from the investment side that are DTC and frozen. Just the Amazon is a little challenging. So if you're looking at that as a channel, challenging to kind of go through Amazon, because you can't really fulfill through Amazon because they don't handle frozen. And so you have to go on your own website, which is a lot more expensive to acquire a customer. And then the second point is, when you're going frozen, it's a lot longer purchase cycle. So just understand that when you're launching a DTC business, that the payback there is not going to be as long or as short, talking about cash conversion and how much you have to pay to acquire a customer versus getting it back. So just things to really be aware of. Most of frozen happens in store.
Yeah. This is probably going to have to be, because I think everyone's going to want to comment. This is going to probably have to be our last question before I do the summary. And I'll just quickly ask each of you, is it going to be easier or harder to raise seed and early stage venture money this year than in the previous years? Anyone want to crack at that?
I will start as a brand. I think that it's easier because there has never been as much capital available, and that people are going earlier and earlier.
Ashley, you got any thoughts on this?
I would say I'm kind of going to split the middle here. I'd say on the very early stage, you might have a bit more challenge because you're going to have a hard time getting trial. And I think all investors were kind of aware that there's a harder hill to climb in this environment on getting distribution and trial. However, Madeline's right that there's more capital than there ever has been before. So hopefully that will kind of be deployed. But you might have to be a little bit more scrappy in the early stage to prove some traction before you can.
Well, and you got to remember this shift. Investors are much more interested in good margins, path to profitability than ever before, in my experience.
Right.
Michael Ham, you asked a question we don't have much time for. I'll just say it and answer it. Does anyone have suggestions if a first ready to drink tea sample run came out at about 80% of where you want it? You could still go to market, as most people won't know the difference, or wait till it's 95 to 100% of the prototype. Don't run it out there until it's perfect. Don't go out with a half-ass. You get one crack at it. It is a very tough and unforgiving market right now, and it will take you years to recover. You may think people won't notice the difference. Make it perfect, or don't go out, is my advice. Anyone want to disagree with me, panelists? No,
not at all. And Gary, just to jump in really quick about that other question, just about raising, I would say it's a bit of both, just so everyone understands. If you don't have good sound unit economics, if you don't have a good, clear path to growth, if you don't have a capital efficient way to prove traction and product market fit, it's going to be really hard to raise early money. If
Yeah.
you do, the money's there, but also the money at the early stage is getting more and more disaggregated. It's in the hands of primarily angels, and there's a lot of angels in this industry that are struggling from angel fatigue because they're getting hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of decks. How are you going to stand out? How are you going to make them money? And also, you better be building relationships with them now. And there's all kinds of changes afoot in terms of equity crowdfunding. You have to be as innovative in your approach to raising capital in your early days as you are in developing your brand, your packaging, and your go-to-market. It needs to be that big a part of your strategy.
Yeah, well said. And Ashley underscored earlier, and Madeline expressed it. Raising capital is your job. Don't think of it as this thing that, a burden. So look, we're nearing the end of our time. On that last comment, I do want to say before, what I want to do here is quickly summarize some of the key points. I mentioned this last week, the HEI, because we've had so much interest from angels and early stage investors, we now have a portal. And so if you have a pitch and you'd like to put it on the portal, go on our website and you'll see instructions for how to do that. This is a way to at least start the process of exploring. So look, this whole thing, and I can't thank the panelists enough for your excellent points. And I know we could have used hours more, but I just want to summarize here. This whole thing is about controlling your destiny, right? And that's what cash efficiency is. It's your destiny. And if you mess up, if you go off the cliff you're no longer in control. Your investors will have control, or you won't have a business at all. So, I heard several key points, most of which are in the spreadsheet. So I won't, in the list that Ashley presented, so I won't reiterate it because again, the recording will be up. But, the most important ones, know the difference between profitability and cash. You've heard this time and again. Every decision impacts cash. Capital efficiency is most important in times of uncertainty, which these certainly are. And again, this is what investors are focused on. The biggest way to impact cash efficiency is to set and practice realistic margins, right? On both the price side and the cost side. You need to invest in learning. You heard this comment throughout. Madeline has talked about this as a sort of autobiographically. Take the hit if necessary, but learning will pay dividends for years. And the corollary of that is ask. You got a long list of folks here in the comments in the chat who are there for resources. Don't be afraid to appear naive. Be disciplined, obviously, and know the difference between what's interesting and what's important. You get only a certain amount of folks like Ashley's ear and focus. You got to use it efficiently. Again, nearing the end of our time, Ashley, Elliot, Madeline, thank you so much. That was tremendously dense presentation, but really, really important. And I want to remind everyone, if Carlene, if you could just put it up real quickly. This is the second in our series here. And frankly, the next few weeks are very much on the themes that these excellent panelists have presented. Next week, we're going to go right into e-com do's and don'ts. And oh my gosh, look at that, nut pods. There's a name we've heard today. And Cauliflower will be presenting. We'll get a chance to talk with John Raish of UNFI and ask your questions of John in the following week. And likewise, the week after that, we'll go to Infra and NCG to talk with those folks and get COVID perspectives. The next one will be also really interesting, telling your story and gaining discovery and trial in the new COVID world. Elliot talked about the incredible care to be efficient in discovery because there's so many places to lose money. That will be an easy place to, we'll be speaking to that. And then we'll have a presentation from two brands that are launching in the current market, giving, like Madeline, some real world experiences of some of the jagged edges that are out there. And there'll be more coming. So as I said before, please let us know topics that would be interesting and important for you. Again, panelists, I can't thank you enough. You did a world of service here. And Again, everybody, this will be recorded. You can take a look later. You'll see contact information. If you do have feedback for us, if you, besides just other topics, how this went, how it could be improved, let us know. And finally, thank you, Carlene. Save the date, May 5, 6, and 7. Registration will begin soon for the next Hirshberg Entrepreneurship Institute, where you'll have a chance to, in 3 6-hour days, dive deep into all of these topics and hopefully hear from each of these wonderful panelists who were here with us today. So
I think the wonderful panelists that you just said we were incredibly dense. Not the first time that's been said about.
the content. Elliot, you're just suffering from frostbite there. Okay, listen, everybody. Thank you. Say it again, Ashley.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us. This was
Yes,
great.
thanks.
Yeah, you guys were terrific. Thank you. Stay safe, everybody. We'll see you next week. Bye-bye.
Bye.